Thank you very much, Deacon Ebetuko, for that introduction. And thank you very much for all of you that have stayed to listen to our presentation, especially over the last few minutes. We've been talking about why Africa cannot feed itself and the way forward. So the last session, which was part one, we look at the context in which we are looking at this, and we said there are 6 questions that this book tried to answer. We said Africa is home to 60% of the world uncultivated arable land. Yet, this continent is unable to feed itself. A continent that has 60% of uncultivated arable land cannot feed itself. And the second question we look at is, why is the war in Ukraine and Russia, which is 6,000 miles away from many countries in Africa, why is it affecting the cost of feed, because of wheat, because of rice, because of beans, because of cassava in Africa? Ukraine is one of the countries that many of us are not even aware, are not familiar with until 6 months ago. Yet it supplies 40% of the bread that we eat. Another question that we try to look at is, why is the yield per acre of crop lower in Africa? We give an example. If you plant cassava in Ghana, in Togo, in Cameroon, you're probably going to get about 15 metric tons per hectare. Whereas if you plant the same cassava in Thailand, you get 22 metric tons of acres. That means that Africa now is about 50% short, even before they start tilling the land. Why is that so? Because if you're going to understand why Africa cannot feed itself, we need to look at all these problems individually and try to find answer to them. Another question that we look at is, why do Ghana and Ivory Coast produce so much cocoa, yet 90% of the chocolate that is consumed in Ghana and Ivory Coast is from Europe, and Europe cannot produce cocoa because of by the reason of their climate. We also say that Africa produces 75% of the global production of cocoa worldwide, yet Africa only gets 2% of the $100 billion that is made from cocoa and chocolate products around the world. So we produce 70% of the raw material, we only get 2% of the revenue that comes from cocoa and chocolate products. And we also say that, why is the poultry that comes all the way from France to Lomé is 25% cheaper than those raised in Lomé, next village to the market? And we said, for example, we know that to bring poultry from France to Togo, they have to raise the chicken, slaughter it, freeze it or chill it, put it in the ship crate, travel 4,000 miles, bring it out, and then take it to a market. Yet, despite all the process that this chicken has to go through, it's still 25% cheaper than the chicken produced in the next village to Lomé. Why is this so? Like I said, until we begin to understand and answer this question, we will only be dealing with the symptom and not deal with the problem of why Africa cannot feed itself. And the last question we look at is that, why is it that the price of cocoa, cotton, and coffee is always fluctuating? In 1980, the commodity market flopped and Africa lost billions of dollars. Yet, the cost of chocolate, textile, and brewed coffee never falls. How come it's the one that Africa has to do with, the raw material that Africa is producing, is the one that falls in the market? The added value product, nothing happens to it. It's always constant. There's always market for it. It's the raw material that's always fall. And millions of farmers in Africa lose billions of dollars. And we continue to wonder, why cannot Africa feed itself? We said that for us to be able to get to the bottom of this problem, we need to begin to answer some of these questions. And before we went too far, we took you through some of the books that we've written to give that will be of use to you. Profitable pig farming. Very, very important. If you're a pig farmer in Africa, you need to buy this book. I would advise you to go to Amazon and go and look at the reviews. Some of the reviews that we've got from all over the world, in Papua New Guinea, in Philippines, Cameroon, New Zealand, Canada, United States, United Kingdom, about farmers that have found this book like it has become a Bible of pig farmer. And secondly, we look at this book, What the Ancient African Knew. This book is particularly important if you're a parent and have children. This book must be read by every young black kid around the world that is between the age of 12 and 20. You can go and watch the video. We emphasize why it's so important that our children know our history. Because if they don't know our history, they cannot build resilience. And what the situation is going to come in the course of their life, while they would need to be able to look beyond themselves, look beyond their family. And it's those kind of history that will sustain them. But today we are talking about why Africa cannot feed itself, part 2. So we said the way we look at Africa cannot feed itself, we look at food production as a marriage. We said food production is like a marriage. Happy families are all alike, while every unhappy family is unhappy in its way. Successful food production is like a marriage. For a marriage to be successful, many different aspects of marriage must come together nicely, such as sexual attraction, agreement about money, child discipline, religion, in-laws, and all other vital things. However, failure in any one of those essentials can lead to a marriage failure. And we said, what are those essential factors that have led Africa not to be able to feed itself? And these are some of the things that we identify. First of all, is the geographical and environmental variables. We look at the role that climate has played. The climate of Africa, every man on earth the scientists have agreed that human being originated from Africa. There's a reason why human being originated from Africa. It's because of the climate and the weather. It's because it's the only place where human with very little hair on their skin can live before they evolve to become, and that's why all human beings started from Africa until we started dispersing to the rest of the world. We look at it in more detail in my book, What the Ancient African Knew. We also look at historical factors, biological factors, post-independent challenges, the prevailing external and macroeconomic factors, inequitable international economic order, and multinational role in extracting agriculture raw material. But today, we're going to focus on geography. So today, we're going to be looking at the topic, the geography matters. Geography matters. First of all, it's very important for us to know that geography of Africa is not the only limit. It's not a completely limiting factor, and Africa is not the only continent that has disadvantage when it comes to climate. It's very important for me to start with this so that we don't just. The goal is not to use our geography as an excuse, but to expose that geography do affect us, and geography do affect other continents in different ways. And if they're able to find a way around it, there's no reason why Africa too cannot find a way around its own geography. Case in point, Scandinavian countries, they have thick snow for 4 to 6 months in a year. And yet, this continent have been able to develop themselves and put things in place. They've been able to travel, they've been able to maintain their life. That when they're looking at one of the happiest and the richest countries in the world, Norway, Finland, Sweden, comes on the top 5, even above the United Kingdom, above the United States. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that geography, I'm going to be talking a lot about geography of Africa. I'm going to be talking about the disadvantages of it and the disadvantages of it. It's not to give us an excuse or to give us reason why we cannot feed ourselves, but to help us to look at it holistically. So we start using the advantage to advantage and start working against the disadvantage, so that at the end of the day we can feed ourselves. With that set as a background, let's look at the name Africa. The name Africa was actually from two sources. The first one was on Latin. The Latin calls, they refer to people in Africa as Africa, meaning sunny. And it's very obvious because Africa is one of the sunniest places in the world. The Greek also, they look at Africa and they call it Aprike. Prike means cold. Ha means without cold. So Africa, in other words, the word Africa means Africa is a warm and sunny place. And that makes sense because one of the things that scientists all around the world agree is that human being originated from Africa. And it's very easy to understand why human being will originate from Africa, because human being from the beginning have never had a lot of air to protect themselves from cold. So if there's going to be a human being that has not a lot of air on his body, he will have to live in a warm place. And hence it's very easy to see why Africa is the origin, is where all human beings emanated from. As from here, that it was after, and that's where human beings stayed for a long time, because they cannot move beyond certain part of the equator because it gets colder. But like I said in my What Are Ancient African Name, 2 million years ago, human beings set the first light in East Africa. And as a result of that lightning, they are able to cook their food and they're able to create warmth anywhere they are. And as a result, human beings can emigrate from Africa to conquer other places of the earth, because if they get there and it's cold, they know how to keep themselves warm. And I said in my last tip regarding What African is, I said one of the things every human being started as black, because when human beings lost their ear, they have to develop black skin to be able to protect themselves from ultraviolet light or the ultraviolet ray of the sun in the equator. And I said that I know from my experience as a pig farmer that if you take a large white pig and you set it off into the wilderness without any human contact, within 3 years that pig will have turned dark or brown. And the two reasons why that pig will do that: one, it will have to turn brown to be able to camouflage itself, because white pig is easier to see. And secondly, to prevent itself from intense heat, it will have to increase its melanin, so that the amount of UV ray that enters its body is limited. And that's why human beings started as black. And as human beings began to emigrate to other parts of the world that is colder, that is their skin that has very little light, the skin has to become lightened so it can take in more sunlight. That's the whole story on its own. But back to geography. Geography matters. Geography is the study of relationship between the physical features of earth and human. So geography looks at the heart and look at how human beings interrelate with it. The word geography was actually from the word geography is actually from a man from Libya was the first time geography was ever used as a word was by an African man called Eratosthenes. I also mentioned that in my What Ancient African Name. And this Eratosthenes was from Libya. He was born in 326. And he's a scientist. He did a lot of things, which if you want to know about it, go and watch my video and go and buy my book on What Ancient African Name. Now, Africa was formed 2 billion years ago. It's one of the first continents on earth to form. You have to realize that at the beginning, the earth was together. Let me just give you the picture of it. The earth was condensed together, was congealed together, as they call it, Panagaea, supercontinent. And the earth make up 1/3 of the earth. And as time goes on, the earth begins to break, and the earth begins to move backward. And how can you prove this? This is Nigeria, this is Brazil. That is 200 million years ago, it's possible for you to walk or swim from Nigeria to Brazil. But as the world continues to split, United States and North America begin to move away from Africa. Africa stayed in one place where other continents were moving, and that's why Africa is very stable. The tectonic plate of Africa was very stable, and that's why rarely do earthquakes happen in Africa, because the structure and the land formation of Africa have metamorphosized and have become so solid that it really moved, unlike all other continents of the world. As I was saying earlier, if you look at one of the best ways to know this, if you look at Brazil, the contour in Brazil and the contour in Nigeria, you will see that if you bring the two of them back together, it will fit in nicely. There's a 2 million percent chance that will have been by chance. Not only that, whatever you can find on the coast of Lagos, you can also find it on the coast of Brazil. That means they must have been together at some point before they start moving apart. Let's go back to where we are. So Africa was formed 2 billion years ago. It remained in one place while other continents were forming and their tectonic plates were moving up and down. Africa is the second largest continent on earth after Asia. That's very funny because most of the map which most of you will have looked at, you will have thought that Greenland is bigger than Africa. We're going to talk about that later. Why it's like that? But what is it? Just put it in context. The whole of Canada, the whole of US, the whole of China, the whole of India can fit into Africa. But we're going to talk about that in a minute. Africa contains 20% of the hard surface, and it only contains 50% of the world's population. That is very important because many times people say that Africa is overpopulated. I think that is wrong. I don't want to go into the history, but for 400 years, young people from the age of 15 to 25 were continually removed from Africa by the slave trade and taken to North America for 12 generations. And that's why when you look at the population of Africa now, it's just catching up. It's not overpopulated. I know that a lot of people say they are concerned about depopulating Africa. Africa is just catching up. In my book, you will look at, I explain in more details why Chinese people are 1.4 billion, the Indian are 1.3 billion, whereas Africa is just 1 billion. You understand why it happens, but I won't go into that. Africa is about 50% of the world population, and Africa is the only continent that human being has been living in since the dawn of humanity. Very interesting. Very interesting. Like I said, Africa was before. The whole world was together. The whole land of earth was together until it started breaking into pieces. And that's why there's a similarity between the contour of Brazil and the West African coast. So that it looks as if you bring them together, they will form together. And that it looks as if it will be possible to walk or swim from Brazil to Nigeria 200 million years ago. Like I said, African earth formed 3.6 billion years ago, and the tectonic is stable. And that's where you really have earthquakes and volcanoes. All the rock have extensively folded and metamorphosed by heat and pressure over time. It makes it a stable place in existence. So, if you're talking about the advantage of Africa, is that it's stable. The tectonic plate is stable, and Africa really experienced all the drama that other continents experience. Even the United States of America get tornado, get tsunami, get hurricane. Africa really have that because of its location. So it's not, the geography of Africa is not only negative. Like I said earlier, Africa have been inhabited since the dawn of humanity. The direction of Africa is very interesting. From north to south is 5,000 miles. And ironically, from the upper part of Africa is only the West Africa bulge out. And from here to here is also 5,000 miles, which is quite interesting. There's an equator divides the earth to almost half. And that is very symbolic because what it means is that the weather that happened in the north is almost the same thing that happened. So as you move away from the equator, the weather changes. We'll look at it later. As you move away from the equator, the weather changes. Because Africa is longer than wider. We'll look into that in more detail. Another important thing about Africa is located between 35 degrees south and 37 degrees north in latitude. But Africa is bulk of Africa is located in between 37 degrees north and 35 degrees of Tropic of Cancer and 35 degrees south of Africa, of the world. We're going to look at the significance of that as we go on later, because these things do affect the ability of the Africa to be able to feed itself. 9,000 years ago, the Sahara Desert was not desert. It was a lush subtropical climate. And scientists have proven that there are many places right in the middle of the desert where people start excavating, seeing the skeleton of alligator, the skeleton of many shells and shells, and there's no way somebody will have taken it there except water, large body of water with animals of different sources have passed through that place before. But the question is, why did it become a desert? According to the scientists, they said about 9,000 years ago, we know that the sun moves around the sun. The sun rotates and also revolves around the sun. They said about 9,000 years ago, the earth wobbled, and as a result, it moved further away from the sun. And when it moved away from the sun, that's when it became cold age in Europe. But in Africa, it brought a lot of lush green weather into the desert. That the desert was really very lush and very green. But what happened? Later on, the earth settled back in its axis again. And all these climate changes. So when people start talking about climate change, it might be new to other people, it's not new in Africa. Climate, with these major changes, has their own implications. Let me give you a good example. One of the reasons why we were able to move away from Africa was that when the earth wobbled, when there was, and the Sahara Desert became a lush, people were able to travel around Sahara Desert and travel to Middle East and travel to Europe, across the desert. But after the earth balanced itself 3,000 years later, the desert came back, man is not able to move again through Sahara Desert. So the climate of Africa determined when people moved and when people stopped moving. Very interesting. One of the things about Africa that is different from other continents is that Africa has a very straight coastal edge, which means, look at the continent with the size, Africa has very small coastline. Unlike Europe that have a lot of coastline, Africa has very limited coastline because it's very straight. It doesn't go in out like it did in Europe. And again, Africa have the highest landlocked countries. That's another favorite story because of the size of Africa and the way, we're not going to talk about that in this section. We're going to talk about it later, the struggle for Africa, how when Europeans divided Africa, they put a lot of country inside. And when you're a country that is inside a continent, you are at a disadvantage because you don't have access to water. And one of the best ways to move items very cheaply, in a very cheap form, is when you travel over the water. But we're going to look at that later. On top of that, though Africa has rivers, for example, we have Gambia River, we have the Niger River, we have the Benue River, we have the Nile River, we have the Congo Zambezi. But most of these rivers are not navigable. Why are they not navigable? Because of the climate structure of Africa, during the rainy season, there's a lot of water, so it's flood all these rivers. So boat can travel in it, but during the dry season, the water becomes dry. And secondly, because of the way the tectonic plate of earth has moved in Africa, there are too many falls, there are too many waterfalls. So if the water is going like this, unlike Europe, where water can travel for miles, and look at it in Africa, it's always drop, and that's why you have many of these waterfalls. But with waterfalls, you can navigate. Interesting. Now, earlier I was talking about the size of Africa. When you look at Africa, African country from the map, you look as if Africa is very small. It was deliberately done. There's a man called Gia de Kema. He designed the map of the world in such a way that countries that are in the northern hemisphere, where all the western countries are and Europe, he made them look big. He now make Africa look very small. But if you want to look at how big Africa is, can you imagine? Africa is so big that you can put the whole of the United States, the whole of China, the whole of India, all the Eastern Europe, and most of the Western people can fit into Africa. That shows the size of Africa. Africa is big country. If you look at, I was telling somebody that if you look at many maps, you see Greenland, it looks as big as Africa. The whole of Greenland is is only as big as one country in Africa, Republic of Congo. Republic of Congo, which is one country out of the 56 countries in Africa, is bigger than the Greenland. Africa is twice the size of Russia, 3 times bigger than China, United States, Canada combined together. So, the question is that why, even now that there's satellite, there's navigator that can tell us the reality, how come most of the map of the world shows Africa as small? I think it's part of the ploy of the West to make Africa look small, so that they will look bigger. But like I said, I'm not going to go into that in this section. I'm going to go into it later. Now the question is, I've mentioned a lot of things about geography of Africa. What's the implication of all of this? How does it affect food production? Which is the question we really want to answer. Because it's on the geography class. This is why Africa cannot feed itself. The north and south axis means that the latitude, when you change, that's a little bit of lesson about geography. Longitude is the line that goes from the top to the bottom. So if you look at the longitude of London and Accra is the same, but the latitude is different. Now the problem with latitude is that the more you move from latitude to another latitude, the climate changes. Now because Africa is north to south, unlike Europe, which is wide, if you look at the map of Europe, here, you see Africa, Europe being very wide and long. That means if you can, whatever you can plant in island here, you can plant it in Japan at the end. Whatever you can plant in Portugal here, you can plant it anywhere, even in Italy or Albania. However, in Africa, let me give you a good example. You can plant wheat in Egypt. Actually, people have been planting wheat in Egypt as far back as 5,000 years ago. But they could not plant wheat in Sudan. Why? Because wheat requires winter rain. However, Sudan and most of Africa have summer rain. So as a result, wheat can grow, but it doesn't grow very well in Africa. Latitude is one of the major determinants of climate and growing condition. And that's one of the things that will hinder the growth of subsistence food in Africa. The east and west expansion of the European country make them to be able to plant the same thing over a long distance. So people can plant whatever you plant in Ireland, which at the end you can plant it in Japan. So that means it's the same weather, takes and you can grow things in larger quantity. Now, I'm not trying to anything about Africa is that because of the size of Africa at the north. That's why it's easier for desert to struck the north, because it's so wide in the upper part. The impact of the sea is very limited in the upper part, because if the wind carries from the sea, by the time it gets to the middle of the year, it's already dissipated. Whereas in South Africa, in the southern part of Africa, you could see the impact of the sea more. I was telling somebody, why is it that the Europeans settled in Zimbabwe and it didn't settle in Nigeria? There are many farmers, European farmers that settle in Zimbabwe. One, Zimbabwe doesn't have a lot of trypanosomiasis. And again, it's cooler than places like northern part of Nigeria. Because northern part of Nigeria is on the bigger side of Africa. That means the impact of the rain is very, very minimal. So it's always hot, and that's why desert crept in and immediately the heart from. Another problem with Africa is that because of the location as well, Africa has what we call torrential rainfall. So let me give you a good example. I was telling somebody that the amount of rain that rain in London is the same amount of rain that rain in Sokoto, which is another part of Nigeria. The only difference is that it rains in another part of Nigeria, all the rain that will rain in London for a year, it will rain in 2-3 months in the north, in Sokoto, and it will dry for the rest of the remaining 9 months. So as a result, the torrential rainfall is very, very hard. And rainfall is very critical in determining what can grow and what cannot grow. Not only that, the way it rains in Africa, it carries a lot of moisture of the nutrient of the floor, which make it very hard and very unproductive. What are other geographical implications? The fact that human being has been living and farming on African soil for a long time means they have degraded the soil more than any part of the continent. And that's why more than 30% lives, about 250 million lives in a poor quality land resource area. Now let's look at the longitude and latitude that I mentioned earlier. Because Africa is between latitude 35 to 37, that is also an area that's very endemic to malaria. Malaria is a very, very big factor in Africa. The Western countries are lucky that they don't have malaria problem because the mosquito that's supposed to carry it cannot survive winter. That's why if you live in Africa and you turn your air condition on, mosquito will disappear. It's not because they're being blown away, it's because they don't like cold. So all other countries that they don't live in that 35 degrees south and 37 degrees north have been able to eradicate mosquito. However, in Africa, which lies around that area, almost the whole of Africa is under the malaria index. And that means the rate of mosquito infection is very high. Now, why is malaria very important? Malaria is very important because more than 500 new cases of malaria take place all the time, every year in Africa. And more than 3 million children die under the age of 5. And not only that, when malaria takes a farmer, it knocks you out for about a week or two, and it takes you another 2 weeks to be able to recover. Thirdly, because of the way malaria kills children, many families decide to have more and more children because there's an assumption that if I give back to 6, only 3 might survive. So there's high fertility, and many people are giving to a lot of children. And because they're giving back to a lot of children, they don't know which one is going to survive. Many parents are reluctant to invest on their children's education because they don't know whether the child is going to survive. I mean, that's what used to happen in the old. That's why we used to have a lot of children. And as a result, we have a lot of children that are not educated. Not only that, when malaria struck a child and the child recovers, they tend to have stunted growth. It has been proven that it does affect the intelligence quotient. That means they are underdeveloped. And if it is the farmer that is affected with malaria, the farmer will not be able to walk. And because he's not able to walk, it brings low income to the family, which is already large. Low income means low tax. Low tax means poor facilities. And that's how the cycle increases. In fact, it has been proven in the map that all the countries that are under the 35-37 latitude, almost all of them are poor compared to people that are above the equator. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to highlight onto our readers, as you guys, that geography has played a lot in ability of Africa to be able to feed itself. And any solution that later when we're looking at solution, we're going to start looking at how to deal with some of these challenges, climatic challenges, because they're not unsurmountable. They are surmountable, but it will require a solid plan from the government, determination from the farmers, improving the image of farmers, young people going into farming, people not just producing raw material but adding value. That is what is going to change the impact of, that's what will make Africa to be able to feed itself. Now, what is our conclusion? We have spent a lot of time to look at the implication of geography on African farming. What I want to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that these challenges is not surmountable. I've given you an example of Scandinavian countries. They have been able to survive despite their own climatic challenges. Africa too needs to focus from the top down to the bottom to deal with these challenges. The government need to take their farmers seriously. They need to put infrastructure in place to make farming easier. They need to provide the fertilizer. They need to provide the field worker that will help farmers to improve their work. Young people need to go into farming and modernize farming and do farming professionally. And not only that, we need to add value to the product we are producing so that we don't lose 50% of what we eventually produce to post-harvest loss. I believe, as we're going to be looking at, as we go into different sessions, that these challenges, these climatic challenges are not unsurmountable, but they will need a concerted thinking. They will, from the government, to the farmer themselves, to young people, to entrepreneurs, to middle class people coming into farming, and come and shake African farming from subsistence farming into commercial farming. And the people need to come in and bring machinery. So Africa should not keep on, in 2022, be importing 90% of its chocolate from Europe, when they are graduates, when they are engineers, when they are scientists being produced in thousands in Africa. I think this is a challenge for us, and we're going to be looking at this as we go on later. Thank you very much. I'll take some questions now.
Heard what you've heard today. Please kindly subscribe to our channel. Kindly subscribe to our channel, and do not forget to hit the